And hello everyone, welcome back to another C++ tutorial. So in this tutorial we will be looking at recursive functions. So if you haven't seen my video on C++ functions yet, I highly recommend you do, because just with the previous video we are going to be building off of the knowledge we gained inside of that video. In fact, with all the future tutorials you'll probably want to know that video. Alright. So what is a recursive function? It is a function that calls itself. Now, I don't really know too many good examples with it, because usually if I use it, it's with pretty large programs, so I didn't really have very small examples of it. But there's one example I always find kind of useful to see. So you might know something like the factorial, where basically if I were to just open up a live environment here, let's say we have 4, right? The factorial is basically like saying, if you know this symbol right there, the exclamation mark, it's basically like then saying, why did I do that? 1 times 2 times 3 times 4, if you entered 4. If you then enter 5, let's say, then you get 1 times 2 times 3 times 4, right, 4 and then times 5. Like that. It depends on what you enter, and then you'll get a specific number with it. For example, here it'll get 24. We're going to be creating that, and we're going to use recursive functions to create that. Now, there are more ways to do this than using a recursive function, of course, but I feel it's a pretty good example of what we can do with it. So let's create a function that returns an integer, and we can just call it fact for factorial. And in here we can also take in an integer. Whoa. Cool. Now what we need to do is we need to basically call this function as well. So let's actually go I almost said console.log, cout, and let's just cout number, just to show you what happens if you call a function on itself. And we can just say num, and then we can just say return fact, and then we just pass in num again. Yeah, let's go like that. But yeah, let's do that just to show you what happens. And in here we can just say fact, and let's say 28, and let's just add a semicolon there. Now let's compile and run this and see what we get. And we actually get an error because I forgot to add my semicolon there. And as you can see, it's just basically a while loop that just returns 28 the whole time, because it calls itself when it returns it. So basically it says return, and then it calls itself and passes in this number it got. So if we were to make this +1, then look what would happen now. The number increases with 1 with every iteration. So that is basically what's happening. We're just calling the function inside of itself, and we're just passing in the same arguments but maybe modified. Now let's try and do some factorial stuff here now that we know that. So first we need to put an endpoint here, because we don't want it to run forever and ever and ever. We want it to stop at some point. So I'm going to say if, and we can say num is equal to 1, because if the num is equal to 1, then we don't have to worry. Because, for example, let's go back here and we say 1 times 2 times 3 times 4, we say that, we get 24. But just like with normal math, if we were to remove that 1, we'd get 24, because anything times 1 is itself. So 2 times 1, that's itself. 24 times 1, that's itself. That's very basic math rules, but some people may not know that, so just in case you didn't, then there's a good refresher or something you might want to know about. Then we can just return 1. And in here we can just say else, and then num, and we can just say return num times factorial fact, and we can just say num -1. And this will work perfectly fine. I'll explain what's happening here in a second. So let me just put the factorial of 4 here maybe, because as we know, that is 24. So let's go here and put it here and see if we actually get what we expect. And whoa, we do not get what we expect. And that's because this is 28. That should be 4, otherwise it's just so big it goes into the negatives. My bad. There we go, it's 24. Now what's actually happening here? Because some people might be a little confused on what's going on. How is this possible? So let's walk through it step by step. So first we create an integer, or we create a function. Then when we call that function, let's say we pass in 4, right? So we pass in 4. Then we go here and we check, is 4 equal to 1? And no, it's not. So it's going to go to this else statement here. And then it's going to say 4 times fact 3. Because we're minusing that number by 1. So it's going to be 4 times 3. Cool. Now here we pass in 3. And in here we have 4 or 3. Is that equal to 1? No, it's not. So it goes here and say 3 times 2. And it just continues like that. And take note, it returns this. This is what's being returned. It might be a little confusing, but it's actually returning this to itself. That's interesting, right? So basically, if we go all the way to where it's 2 times fact 1, which we just return 1 on the end of the day, let's go here and just say 4 times fact 3, like that. So what it basically just does is it takes this and it times them together. So 2 times 1, that's 2. So this will give us 2. So let's just go 2. Now 3 times 2, that gives us 6. So this will give us 6. And then 4 times 3, that will give us 12. But this isn't times 3. This is times 6. Because remember, this 3 times fact 2, that actually returned 6. So this here is 6. It's not 3, it is 6 because it returned a 6. This right there, that's what it returned because it has a return statement here. So it's not that, it's actually 4 times 6 because that's what it returns. And if we count that up, it's 6, 12, 18, 24. Like that. And that's how it works. It might be a little confusing, but that's the thing with recursive functions. Oftentimes they can be confusing, so you should be careful with how you use them. Because if you use them in a way that can be confusing for others to read, it could just discourage them from working with the code. And maybe you come back in the future and now you have to kind of just draw out what's happening. Kind of like what we did now. But yeah, that is, all in all, a recursive function. It's just a function that calls itself. Oftentimes, there's not really too much of a use for them. But there would come that occasion where, oh, you know what? I could probably speed up my code by using recursive functions. If you have heard anything about memoization, you would know that that probably uses recursive functions. It calls itself. If you don't know anything about memoization, you don't need to know anything about it, but if you want to boost your skill on this, then I do recommend you go learn up on memoization, because that could help you with recursive functions. And yeah, for now that would be all we have to do with functions. Thank you all for watching. I hope you all enjoyed, and I'll see you all again in the next C++ tutorial.